And your work has really been unusual because typically in autism care, neurologists or pediatric neurologists will simply, diagnose the problem, and then they'll prescribe behavioral therapy. We call it ABA. And it's a form of behavioral therapy for autism. And it can be effective, an important part of the overall treatment plan. But they don't really ever think about the other things that are often found in these kids. Like 95% of them have terrible gut issues. 75% have immune dysregulation, right? They may have different nutritional things going on, toxic load, things that really are not looked at. And I'm really curious, someone who sort of comes from your pedigree, Harvard Medical School, you're a Rhodes Scholar, University of Oxford Graduate School, as a pediatric neurologist, how did you first come to understand that the traditional paradigm of autism was flawed and you needed to think differently about it?
Well, so much of my current understanding of autism I gained from working with really remarkable researchers at different stages of my career. So when I was on faculty at Columbia University about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I had amazing mentors whose specialty was mitochondrial disease and dysfunction, and looking at childhood conditions that related to this. And so very early on, I was exposed to the mitochondrial disturbances that are associated with different neurodevelopmental diagnoses like autism and ADHD and intellectual disability. So it was through that process of my training and working with amazing clinicians, researchers who specialized in understanding mitochondria, metabolism, immune dysfunction, and brain development, that then I was able to take that and go even further to then understand how other body systems like the gut and the immune system and so forth influence brain development in profound ways.
Yeah, so when you pull on a thread, it's connected to everything else, right? You have to go down that rabbit hole and you have to keep going because you keep understanding that there's this intersection of all these different phenomena that are contributing to this brain dysfunction.
That's right.
That I think could be fairly described as a metabolic encephalopathy. And in English, that basically means, encephalopathy means you're a brain pathology. So it's some type of metabolic disturbance in the brain.
Yes.
And when we talk about metabolism, we're talking about basically energy production in the mitochondria. So mitochondria are the little factories in your cells that take oxygen and food and combust it and turn it into energy in the form of ATP. So if you have a brain energy problem, you're going to have a brain function problem.
That's right.
And that can lead to a whole host of things. We've had Christopher Palmer on the podcast, who's a psychiatrist from Harvard. You know him?
I do.
His work, he wrote a book called Brain Energy, where he sort of accidentally discovered that by giving people a ketogenic diet, which optimizes mitochondrial function, he was able to cure schizophrenia, which is an incurable disease. And in the same way, you've kind of discovered by working on mitochondria and metabolic health and gut health and immune health and nutritional status, you've been able to help these kids with autism improve and in some cases actually reverse autism. Now, you're again, a highly pedigreed neurologist. And I think, many of your colleagues would consider it quackery to say that you could reverse autism. It's just, it's a false hope. You shouldn't be telling patients this. And yet that's exactly what you're doing. Can you tell us about how that's going?
Sure.
And like what that
Well,
like?
we know that, autism is defined by a set of descriptive criteria, so it's not in itself a biological diagnosis or biological cause. And
it's
so
descriptive.
It's descriptive. And so that is really just a starting point. We need to look deeper. So I think of autism as an autism diagnosis is a starting point because there's so much more to understand and learn about a child, about their unique biology, their unique neurodevelopmental profile, all aspects of their health. Brain and body. So we sometimes forget the head is connected to the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So as a neurologist, when I first went into my training, I was fascinated by the brain. And I thought nothing's more interesting than how the brain develops in children. But very quickly you realize that the brain is so profoundly influenced by the rest of the body that as a neurologist, you can't just think about the brain. Yeah. You have to be thinking about every other part of the body and about the child's environments, their home, their school, their community, what they're encountering out in the world, how they spend their time, their social connections, everything, because all of it influences the brain.
It's so true. I mean, what you're saying is so important. And I just want to highlight a couple of things you said. The first is that the diagnosis is just a starting point. And in medicine, this is so true across every specialty. We're really good at naming diseases and then blaming the name for the problem. I know why you don't have good social skills and have stimming problems and have no speech. It's because you have autism. Well, autism isn't the cause of those symptoms.
Exactly.
It's just the name we give to people who share those collection of symptoms. And there may be a myriad of causes. In fact, I don't think there's any such thing as autism. There are autisms.
That's right.
Each kid
That's
is
right.
unique and different. If you've seen one kid with autism, you've seen one kid with autism.
Yes.
There are similarities and there are commonalities, but you have to really think differently. And I think the other thing you said, I just want to highlight, is something really radical, is that your body affects your brain. We know about the mind-body effect, but what about the body-mind effect?
Yes.
And that's why I wrote my book, Ultra Mind Solution, 15 years ago, basically saying how to fix your brain by fixing your body first, right? And I think, your discoveries around mitochondrial health and the gut have really helped you treat patients in a very different way. So you do a comprehensive approach. You have an amazing clinic called Cortica that's a company that is across the country providing services in a 360 way to families and children with autism. And in that, it's not just behavioral therapy. It's not just family support. It's just not developing the social framework so these kids can thrive. It's dealing with these biological issues. So I'd love to dive into some of the biology because, most people don't talk about the biology of autism. They talk about the symptoms and that's it. It's kind of naming and blaming.
Yep.
And I always say, that's from my mentor, Sid Baker. He says, we have a problem in medicine. It's a naming and blaming game. We blame the name for the problem. And then we think what is wrong, we know what's wrong with you. But if you know the name of your diagnosis, it doesn't mean you actually know what's wrong with you.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest mistake, certainly in autism. The biggest mistake is attributing any feature or symptom or characteristic of a child to autism. It doesn't make any sense because autism is just that set of descriptors.
Right.
And so we really, really have to look deeper. And we know so much more now about some of these root causes and contributing factors.
Yeah.
And as you said too, there's a lot of research trying to understand what we call subtypes or subgroups of autism. But at this point in time, I really think we need to treat every child as their own unique subtype and really seek to learn as much as possible as we can about their biology.
Yeah. So in your investigations of this, what are the kinds of things you actually look at when you're assessing a patient? You make the diagnosis, and I think I call it thinking and linking.
Yeah.
As opposed to naming and blaming, we have to think and link. In other words, think about why.
Yes.
Causes, and maybe you could speak to this incredible growth in the epidemic of autism from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 36, maybe getting worse